Hi, I'm Ronnie Ochero. I'm a games development lecturer with the ACM. Check out my session on 3D modeling.
Hi. So, first of all, before you start, it's generally a good idea to kind of get some reference, just so you know the kind of thing that you're going to be going for. In my case, I have the reference on the other side of the screen, so kind of working off of like a mood board of kind of ideas and visual styles. Um, when you're modeling, the first thing you would do is generally start off with primitives, so basic shapes and boxes, as you saw I just did. Um, And as you're going along, for the most part, it's going to be a lot of kind of edits and extrusions in order to kind of get the basic shapes. So here, I'm trying to kind of make the main body of the spaceship. Um, so nothing detailed yet, but more kind of an experimental phase in order to make sure that I'm kind of headed in the right direction. Um, There are like a few modeling kind of techniques that I'm using here. So some shortcuts just to speed things up with some selections and things like that. Similarly, like when you're modeling, it's generally like a good idea to kind of rotate around. Sometimes modeling something from one perspective will look good, and then from another perspective will be kind of slightly iffy. Similarly here, in order to speed up time, rather than make a whole new primitive, I just basically cloned the original one and took a section that I wanted from it and just began modifying that. So I turned on the wireframe on shaded and turned off the grid system because it was kind of getting in the way. Wireframe on shaded basically acts as a wireframe guide on top of the actual model. Where that helps you is that you kind of get an idea of the structure, where to edit, and things to pull around. So some of this as well is eyeballing it. So in some cases, you might be given specific guides and measurements to go with, but for the purposes of this, I generally just kind of eyeballed a lot of it and trying things out and seeing what fits based off of the design. Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is the interpretation based off of your eye, you being the artist, I should say. So as you see, I've just created a cylinder in order to kind of start off with the shapes for some of the thrusters, basically. And also get something cylindrical into the scene so that could be used to work off, if that makes sense. So we have like a starting point for that. We don't need to keep recreating it. So selected one part and basically invert the selection and then chose to bevel the top. Kind of is a quicker way of getting that effect because you can kill two birds with one stone essentially, and then doing it again. So if you want to select specific faces, but there's a lot of them, usually you select the opposite and then invert the selection or the easier kind of parts or components to select and then work from there. Similarly with extrusions. So when you're editing things, it's a good idea to kind of use extrusions in order to kind of manipulate shapes. A quick shortcut as well. Rather than try and eyeball something that's symmetrical, a shortcut is to model it once and split it in half and mirror it. So that way you've got two sides that are very similar. Then you combine them, weld them, make them one component, basically. So that both sides now are equally kind of the same in terms of structure. Again, as you've seen, kind of extruded and took parts of the original mesh to make a new one. Again, scaling it just so it fits in terms of the scale and the size in relation to where it's going to be used. So I did notice that when I was making some of the edits, some of the faces came out quite faceted. So there are some options to kind of smooth things out. Similarly, like when you do that, it can kind of bleed over, which it just did. So kind of had to reverse it on certain aspects. So also saves a lot of time if you're able to clone certain bits. Like I just made one propeller blade, but because it's going to be repeated over, you can clone it quite easily, and then kind of saves you a lot of time in making everything individually. And similarly, like with the inside of the turbines, it's the same deal. So I'm just doing the same thing on the opposite side as well. And then just balancing it out, combining the two objects, and then balancing it out to make sure that nothing looks crazy out of place. Cloning that over, deleting the old one. Because if you've done it once and it's something that's used again, you don't really need to kind of keep hammering it through. I'm just going to position that and just check how it's looking or how it's going in the right direction, and it seems cool. Then I'm going to start kind of working on the back of the spaceship as well a little bit, just to get the silhouette and the major volumes in there. And again, checking like how faceted this is and needs to be. Cool. So once happy with that, again, need that same shape. So rather than make a new one and rescale it, I'm going to just work off of what is already there and position it. And just scale it so it matches. And there, I'm going to use a quick tool called Booleans, which essentially takes a cutout of one mesh and just basically cuts it out into the other one. So you can kind of, it's really handy, essentially, if you want to get like a shape in there without doing a ton of modeling. The only thing is you do need to do a little bit of cleanup, which is like what I'm doing right now in order to make sure that things behave the way they need to. And again, some of the meshes being similar, you can clone them over, keep reusing them. It's like with this one, the wing does have some kind of like turbine mechanic to it. So, well, that's where they're essentially supposed to be. Because I don't see like the insides, I can just afford to get rid of that. And then this one, bring it in a little bit more, just so it fits the style. It's nothing too crazy. So same deal with this, just bringing it down, having a look, seeing if it's works or if it's working. And then that one, balancing that out too. So the moment just playing around with ideas, so nothing is concrete, and then just double checking that this is straight and it's working. There, I can focus on the other side of the turbine, make sure it's all good. Because the turbine has center, so kind of clone the original one or the original thruster, kind of positioning this near the center so that there's something there, not just like kind of two empty bolts, if that makes sense, or two empty turbines. Something has like some center to it. And then you're just going to add a little bit more of a design to it. So selecting certain bits and then extruding out so they have a bit more mechanical feel to them. Oh. And likewise, just checking the structure, checking things make sense. Maybe this like can go up. You always have to question how things are looking and whether they're working. And also from rotating and looking around, you can spot areas that need a little bit more development or gaps that need to be filled. It's like here, these guys are cool on one side and not on the other side, so it's a good spot. Same way, making sure that they fit. I did dock the menu, So that's what you're seeing on one side of the screen. Occasionally I do that just for speed. So Maya's quite good in that sense that you can adapt the menus to fit or to just float essentially. Sometimes it does get in the way, as you see. So just took it off real quick. But I'm playing around with the structure. This seems to fit better than the previous one. So I'm sticking along these lines. And seeing what else I can add in just to kind of give it a bit more of a sizzle. So again, I need certain shapes or certain bit. Rather than model it from scratch, just going to take one piece, start editing that. So making like a selection of the center bit, and then adding extrusion to it. And that way it gives it a nice little kind of part that fits the bill. Again, rinse and repeat with the top section. So because these ones are going to be a little bit more square, or start from a little bit more square situation or rectangular, kind of use that shape to kind of place it where it needs to be, just to kind of check the direction of things. And then edit them to suit. So is that working that way or this way? So to me, that way kind of seemed a little bit better. And from there, combine the two, make sure to delete history, just so there's no kind of craziness happening in Maya. And then again, run the same Booleans operation that I did before in order to make sure there's an intersection of the original mesh come out. And again, cleaning up the areas that kind of need to be a little bit more technically sound. And so Maya doesn't kind of misbehave a little bit later on. Because it's one thing to make something look pretty, but then if you just leave it kind of technically flawed, it does kind of throw hiccups every now and again. Right, that one kind of in the right direction, kind of just doing another little inspection, seeing how I really feel about that. It seems okay to me. So that being said, just going to kind of try and work on the back thrusters, like the mini ones, and just block it out essentially. So nothing final, just seeing roughly where would this fit. Just put that near the back. Maybe, yeah. So the wings need some weapons. So rather than do that first, probably work on the weapons or the guns for the weapons, should I say. So again, a lot of edits, a lot of extrusions, so that one didn't really need collapsing to the center. Trying to kind of get an idea of how would a weapon on a spaceship look? Like it'd be that kind of thing. So there's a lot of thinking at this stage, a lot of kind of checking if things work. And if they don't, it's just a case of going back on them and just making sure that things are balanced out. So that seems a bit more like it's in the right direction. So from a distance, that kind of works. So having said that, then we're making kind of the muzzles, or the sci-fi muzzles, should I say. So again, extruding and recycling meshes that we already have, just to save time. Softening the edges, because when you do that, it does come out quite faceted. So again, kind of you got to go in and just kind of define which parts you want to be kind of more angular and which parts you want to be more softer. So this one wasn't quite sure kind of how this might look. So I was trying out a couple of designs, maybe have it like that, like where the muzzle goes 360. Yeah, so I thought, like, let's just get the main part of the weapon in there first before we start messing around with other things. And having a look at it, I was a little like, it works, but it's a bit much. Maybe from the front. Just take that part away, and then that's all right. That's kind of the right balance. Similarly, having said that, like the main weapon seems a bit simple, so I thought just to break it up as well, do something with the middle section. So kind of rather extruded the first part, right? Again, extruded out the second part, made sure that they're very close together. And then smoothed it out so it wasn't crazy faceted. From that point, made sure that these guys are welded together because they're still kind of separated, as you can see. So this one isn't really the quickest thing to do. This is all artists generally end up welding stuff together. So just make sure they're one solid mesh, essentially. And there's no like holes or unneeded holes within your mesh. Once that's all good, you still see there's a little bit of smoothness. It doesn't need to be there. So going in and defining like the parts that need more definition. Cool. And that, it looks a bit more broken up. It's looking better. So once I'm happy with that, then I'm kind of thinking, okay, combine them together. Okay. Make sure the pivot point is there. This will come into play a little bit later. So the pivot point being near the center. Don't need the old ones anymore. So I can get rid of those guys. Maybe save that one for later because I probably might need that. And then start to position them so there's a slight angle, which helps. This one I like, but probably is better reversed. So I'd scale it kind of inwards within itself. And then reset it so there's no kind of craziness happening in Maya. And then from there we have one side of the spaceship. And do a similar deal on the opposite with kind of the other side. So then you've saved yourself a lot of time. You don't need to make every wing separate. Just make one and then kind of copied, pasted, duplicated over. So with the back thrusters, it's kind of a similar deal. So first, like just blocking out what the shape would be, just kind of trying to get a feel for it. Probably come back to that a little bit later, just because I'm looking at cylindrical structures for a while. So it's kind of best to kind of start fleshing out the main spaceship to begin with. So just trying to define where the pilot would sit and how to kind of get around that structure. So beveling these guys isn't really behaving itself the best. So you probably have to go for it another way. And also just kind of tidying up the shape. Making sure that it looks more like a spaceship and less like a weird Toblerone or a cake or something like that. So added a little more bevel to that and just kind of tweaking it a little further. All right, when I'm happy with that shape, so it seems to have the correct silhouette. So start working on the screens. So kind of just make a duplicate again. Try and run some actions, but it's fair enough that there's kind of more verts there than original. So kind of look to merge them so things are cleaner, essentially weld them. And then I can go and start cutting out where the inside of the window would sit, essentially. So it's going to be slightly different on the main at the top than it is on the side. So kind of need to define two sets of lines for that. With that part cut out or defined, then I just essentially delete the parts I don't need, get rid of the original one, and just to make sure that this has a little bit of a tilt to it. So add one edge to the middle and start welding so that there's a little bit of a more unique shape. So at first I tried to remove the edges that way, but I didn't like that. It took away too much. Once the shape was defined, I did an extrusion inwards, similar to before. I'm going to run that same action of reversing the normal, so it's not inside out completely. Because it's going to be a Boolean, I need to make sure that there's enough intersection for you to notice kind of what's happening. So I could go into X-ray mode, select the two that don't quite, extrude in, bring them in a little bit more. And then from there, first save, because at times Maya does have a habit of crashing, especially when you do a lot of edits. So just for safety, I saved it, delete the history, and then run a Boolean again. So then it's cut out like the section that I just had previously defined. And again, going in and cleaning it up so there's no further kind of madness happening later on. So sometimes it kind of does help and add the lines for you. You might need to weld and tweak. But for the most part, you're going and do it yourself. Cool. With it going in the general direction I feel like it should be going, I'll start doing more tweaks. I'm checking it without the wireframe to see like the structure is okay. This one looks like it needs a little bit of softening on the edges. So I just kind of took that down a little bit. Let's brought back the wireframe just so I can see what's going on. And then again, to make the front of the plane, just use the clone just to start off with. And start to tweak it. So just so it's something a little bit more unique and something that fits. Start editing that, having to think, is this working? Okay, maybe that needs bringing down a little bit more. And similarly, probably that, bring in. And rescaling some bits as well. Because you need to know it's slightly different, but it's a part of it. And also it's big enough that it makes a difference. So scale-wise and relation-wise to the main body, kind of starting to get a good feel for kind of how I want everything to kind of fit together. And just cleaning up the meshes to make sure there's no kind of funny business happening. Cool, and I'm happy with that. Take a little part of the inside section, again, extrude it out, and use it to make an intersection. So, or a Boolean, should I say. So just got a bit distracted with something on the other screen real quick, but coming back. It's good to know. Boolean is different. So if it goes black, it's usually that the mesh is kind of reversed, or the face. Okay. So again, cleaning up the mesh and just making sure things are cool and behaving themselves. So now I'm happy with that, start working on the other thrusters behind. So having worked on the other pieces, I've got kind of an idea of the general shapes I want. So I can start riffing with ideas, putting things together. So I still want some kind of pattern, some kind of difference to the main body of it. So I'm gonna look to work on that a little bit more. So define. So these guys I want to be at one level on the extrusion, and then the other one to be bigger. Not too big, but big enough. And from the back of it, make sure I select everything. And collapse that to center. So because I made one, I don't really need to make every one individually. Just do one and just keep cloning it, deleting history. So I like the way it's starting to look, start to fit together. Maybe do something here, so it's not just a flat thing. Just add a little bit of shape to it. And clean it up a little. Cool. So the thrusters, I do like them, but they seem to just, I don't want them to just float. So see if I can make something, especially the top ones. The bottom ones, you don't see so much, it's not so bad. I'd like the top ones to kind of have some kind of a better relationship with the main body of the ship. So kind of try and position a Taurus, give it a little bit more resolution so it's not like super low res and blocky. So maybe that. Don't want it too high because then it just gets difficult to maintain. And then delete the parts that I don't really want or the parts that aren't gonna be seen. Right, so I don't need that guy because I now have this. So just position him where I want him to be. So maybe like there, so it has something to it. Delete the history on that. And then also the top half. So just so there's a bit more going on here, it's not so flat, nothing happening. So give that a little bit of a extrusion, an inverted extrusion. And then some of the sci-fi designs had like sci-fi panels in them and stuff. So I don't like the idea. Add a few of them. Quite small, but still make a difference. Maybe a few of them. Similarly, you could recycle the thrusters, just so that like there's a few interesting shapes in there too. It's not just straight up. Or and add a sphere in there, just for kicks. So now you have like a nice variety of shapes. And there you go, made my little battleship. So if this is something that interests you, I definitely recommend having a play with Maya. We kind of run a lot of courses at the ACM as well for 3D modeling. And it's fun. It's really good to do. It's really relaxing. So I highly recommend it.